Well, hello everybody. A very, very warm welcome to ECPD webinars today. And it's lovely to see so many people here to listen to and to interact with Jost Zetzsche. Before we start, I'd like to just invite you later on to take a look at the program of upcoming courses and presentations that we have lined up for the rest of the year. Just go to that website that you see there. And of course, we also have an e-library of on-demand videos, and it's positively bursting with top quality professional development opportunities for translators and interpreters. Today, Jost is going to be asking you to interact with him in a number of ways. You can type comments into your questions pane on your attendee control panel. If you like to move on a slide, Jost, they can see. If you have a headset with a mic, you may actually ask us to unmute you so that you can speak. To do this, either send us a message through your panel, through the questions part of the panel, or put your hand up. You can see the hand symbol on the grab tab to alert us. Jost will make it quite clear that he will want to be hearing your voices, so you'll know when to do this. If you don't have a headset, just send your comments via the questions pane in the normal way. There will be a recording of this presentation, so look out for that tomorrow. And just one last thing, Jost, if you wouldn't mind going on to the last slide of my little bit. On June the 2nd, it sees us producing a slightly unusual webinar with Kevin Losner. He works very closely with developers to enhance user experience, and he has a very interesting concept for users of MemoQ for authoring and editing in a single language, and he'll be explaining all of these on June the 2nd. So now over to Jost for what is looking set to be a very lively presentation and discussion.
Thank you so much. So what I would, as Lucy just said, what I would like to do is truly have this be fairly interactive. We're going to have hopefully time for questions at the very end, but there's also going to be at least 4 blocks or 4 times when I will ask you to contribute by either voice or written questions to very specific topics, and obviously you don't have to do it, but if you do want to do it, I think that would make for a very interesting conversation. I also have put down a hashtag there on this slide, next big thing, if you want to contribute on Twitter or elsewhere, you are welcome to do that. So translation technology, what's the next big thing? The title is actually slightly different than what you found in the program. This essentially is a follow-up in a way to a webinar, or to a couple of webinars I did about a year and 3 months ago, when I said that we would reconvene in a year or slightly more than a year and revisit what we've learned then. So let's see how we can bring in what we've learned about a year ago. I'm sure not everyone among you was there a year ago, but some of you probably were, and see what we can do with it this year. Usually I don't like to show an agenda for what I'm doing, but I do want to show the agenda just for you to understand where I would like to have you chime in, if you would. And essentially what I want to do is I want to have you chime in where those empty bullets are. I'm not giving away yet what the next big things are, but after those, it would be great if you want to contribute to our conversation here, because I do want this to be a conversation. And the conversation, of course, has started, a few weeks ago when I asked you, and I'm sure that many of you did contribute to a document that I put online, which was very well, worked through and answered and responded to and commented on. And what we are doing today essentially is part of that discussion now in a more public forum. So we're going to talk briefly about translators and technology. Then we're going to talk about translators and technology vendors, what our relationship is and how this can be improved, or whether it already is a point that it's a on a positive level. Then we quickly revisit the 2014 webinar, what has come of that, and then we're going to look at what we are doing today and what we need to be doing to move forward. So for years, I've been giving talks about translation technology for a long time now, and I've almost always have started my my workshops or presentations with an image of Saint Jerome, where I, showed Saint Jerome, and I said, Saint Jerome is a fantastic guy who, had great passion for language, had great passion for translation, and so on and so forth. But we need to get away from him in the sense that we need to recognize that we work in a very different manner than he worked, 1,600 years ago. And I think that we have done that. I think that we have come to a point where Saint Jerome is still our patron saint. We all know that, Saint Jerome, the patron saint of translators. He was a translator of the Bible into Latin, and not only translated the Bible, but essentially created Latin in the way it was spoken and used for many hundreds of years afterwards. But I think that we have recognized now that we do need technology. I think it's not, we don't discuss that anymore. We don't need to discuss it anymore because it's a widespread consensus. And those among us who are not using technology, or who are not using technology in a way that you and I might be using it, they're okay with it, and they have found niches where they don't need that kind of technology, and there's no reason to argue anymore. So technology has become a tool for us that we have, that we have embraced, and that is something really positive. But what we of course want to make sure, if we have said technology is a tool now, we want to continue to control it. I put the to continue in parentheses because I think we haven't always controlled it, to be honest. Partly because we have argued so much about technology for so many years, and have have wondered whether it's really positive or negative, whether it's something that enhances our profession or makes us sort of powerless. We have forgotten sort of to become part of the process of technology development. But I think at this point we need to recognize that we need to really become part of the process. We need to control how technology is used today, and we need to control how translation technology will be used in the future. There's really good news though, and the good news is that developers are really eager to engage with us. I'm positively certain that many translation technology developers are very frustrated with me right now, because I've been bombarding them with emails in the last 2 months or so related to this webinar here, asking them for their views, for comments, for statements on what their progress was on things that they promised a while back, and so on and so forth. But the amazing thing is that they've been incredibly patient, and not just patient, but been very smart and very helpful in their responses. These are the tools whose developers I contacted for this particular webinar. You can see it's a wide variety of tools, and of all those whom I contacted, those are the ones that didn't respond. And I originally had a heading over this slide that said bad guys. They're of course not bad guys, right? I mean, I know there's reasons for them, or there were reasons for them not to respond. And in fact, also, I know that at least 2 or 3 of them, of those who didn't respond, are now part of this audience. So they're even among those who didn't respond, there is an interest in what we have to say and what we want them to do. But those are the ones that did respond. And I will give you later on a link to a document in which I compiled all the complete responses, unedited and just kind of nicely formatted and easily accessible. And I would very strongly recommend you to look through that document, because the thoughtfulness and the the insights that these guys have are really quite amazing. Many of them have been associated with the language industry for a very long time, and they because they are exposed to so many different sectors of the world of translation, of the translation industry, they know things that you and I might in fact not have might not grasp quite so easily, just because we are not exposed to so many different sectors of the world that we live in. So these are the folks that responded, and in many cases responded very, very thoughtfully. Earlier I said developers are very eager to engage with us. Now, who is us? And I think that's really important to ask, and that's become a sort of a theme for me in the last couple of years, that I realized that that the world of translation is very, very, very diverse. And the reason why that is important to realize is that if it's so diverse, then that automatically means that that what's true for me is not necessarily true for everyone else, and maybe not even for anyone else. Obviously we are dealing with many different languages, which has a big impact on technology. What works in one language might not work in another language, but we're also working with very different markets. We're working for different customers, and then there's not only us as the translators, there's of course us as anyone who is offering translation services, and that essentially ranges all the way from Google to, with Google Translate, to the literary translator or the poetry translator who doesn't use any kind of technology, and all the line bridges and SDLs and whatnot somewhere in between. So the world of translation is very, very, very diverse, and the fact why the reason why I'm not using translation industry like we and including me do so often is because it seems to me that we don't actually have an industry. An industry is if I talk about the car industry, I don't know much about the car industry, but I imagine that the automobile industry is an industry where people essentially all have the same goal in some way or the other, and I don't think that's true of us necessarily. So we might have to think about a different word than industry when we talk about the world of translation. Admittedly, world of translation is not particularly good either. So we're very, very diverse, but on the other hand, I think that and this has not always been like that. I think that developers, translation technology developers, have recognized, have embraced the fact that we as translators, as diverse as we might be, but we are a very, very important constituency. Now, you go like, well, if it's, we're translators and those are translation tools, so how could we not be an important constituency? Well, for many years, I think some of the more important tools were primarily not, I think, developed for the individual translator, for instance. They were more developed for larger corporations, and partly that was our own fault because we didn't engage enough with the developers. But I think that in the last few years we see a real return to a focus on translator-centric productivity features. That means not features that necessarily just support the project manager or the translation department head within a corporation, but you and me as translators. And I also see, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit today, sort of a re-evaluation of machine translation. I know that machine translation has long been sort of the horror vision of many of us translators, but I think that we are seeing machine translation being looked at again and being wondered about as something that might actually be useful for translator productivity aside from the processes like post-editing of machine translation that we've seen so far, but we're going to talk about that later on. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start at in 2014, excuse me, when we when we met for the first time, and when we also sort of corralled to find some needs that we have and that we wanted to present to technology vendors. What we did then was that we talked about very specific features. We wanted to talk to them about voice recognition. We wanted to talk about access to external resources, so bring in, dictionaries, etc., into your tool. We talked about term bases and translation memories, machine translation, and we talked about general user friendliness. And we had a number of questions surrounding those topics that we presented to the developers, which many of them answered. And what I did about a month and a half ago is I went back to those developers who not only answered them, but said we are working on something like this and it's going to be in our tool maybe within the next year or maybe in the near future. And I wrote to them and said, so you promised a year ago that you will have this in your tool. Where is it? Have you in fact made progress on it? And like I said, very generously, they responded. And what I did is, many of you know that I'm writing a newsletter, and in this newsletter, which this link will lead you to, and many of you, I'm sure, are readers of my newsletter, so you don't have to go to this webpage here. In this newsletter, I did then compile all the responses, and I think they're very sweet. They're very sweet, not because they're, sweet in the sense of childish. They're sweet because they're so honest. They're very, they don't try to, beat around the bush. They say, okay, this is what I truly did work on, and this is what I didn't get to. So very a great way of us not just talking and talking to a wall that doesn't respond, but talking to people who are actually responding to us and who have the decency to then say, well, maybe I didn't get to what I was going to get to. So if you haven't read through this, I would really recommend to look through that. Let me see whether I can get back to my, yeah, here we go. I hope that you saw this the screen, but I think you must have. So this is what happened in 2014, and this is how we followed up in 2015. This year, I was hoping that we can get to the next stage. I was hoping that we can kind of talk about the next big thing. And what I meant by that was not talk about existing features that might be improved, but things where we can really push the technology to a point where we can really, do something new and something else. So I put this document online that was sitting there for 2 or 3 weeks, and like I said, many of you contributed to it, and we did find, I think, a number of really interesting things. I'm not sure that we found the next big thing, to be honest. I'll show you in a second what the themes are that we found, but I'm not sure that we found something that completely is going to change the course of technology. But I think that might be a good thing in a sense, and I'm not saying that to as an apology for that because it didn't work. But I think what that means, what it could mean, is that we actually are heading in the right direction already. That in general we're doing okay with the technology that we have. We do need some improvements and changes that are maybe not so much feature specific but more general. But overall the direction is okay. Also, another consideration is Christian Vai from Across wrote back after I sent him the questions, or after I sent him the summary of our discussion. He said, it is interesting to see your list of requirements toward the tools. as it totally differs from the list of requirements that we get from our Translator Advisory Council. The input here is more on quality-related functions, statistics on performance, and legal aspects of the translator's work. And I understand what he is saying. I think it's when you talk about technology, you tend to talk about what you're using day in and day out, and it's kind of hard sometimes to take a few steps back and say, all right, let's just forget what I have right now. What do I really want? That's a really difficult thing to do because you're so embedded in your environment of day in and day out work that that I understand that we possibly were not able to make this big leap into a completely different dimension of what technology could do. But you know, maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. So here are the themes that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about translation environments, and I'll explain each of those in a second. We're going to talk about machine translation as an organic resource, and I'm not talking about, you know, bioorganic. Of course, I'm talking about something that fits organically into our existing processes and workflow. We're going to talk about OS and operating system independence, and we're going to have some interesting answers for that, I think. And then we're going to talk about new business models that could be supported and driven by technology. The link that you find down here at the bottom is a link that I really would recommend you to write down, because what that leads you to is a document, is the document that I mentioned earlier. I hope that you can see my slide again. And this is, it's a 22-page or so document that contains all the answers by all the different tool vendors, and they are just really interesting. I think somebody could write a PhD thesis on some of the ideas that were brought forth in, and I mean, some tool developers, for instance, you know, now that I'm just looking at Omega T here, Omega T, for instance, is a slightly different kind of tool. It's an open source tool, as many of you know, and the project manager Didier Briel, you know, did say that whatever he says here, he can't really. It's just that he can essentially just say what Omega T has today, because the nature of an open source project is that there is no roadmap like you have for other tools. So you know, the answers differ, but or the kind of the answers differ, but I would strongly recommend you to look at this document, and I shortened the URL here for you so that it's easier to remember, tinyurl.com visions 2015. So let's jump right into the topics here. Translation environments. What are translation environments, and why do we need translation environments? Well, Yves Champollion from WordFast, you know, I assume that some of you have met him, and those who haven't met him have really missed something. He is quite direct in whatever he is. I remember last year at the ATA, at the American Translators Association's conference, they always give a big party, WordFast does, and he after a concert that was given during the big party, he went on the stage and told a joke that took a really long time, took like 5 or 10 minutes, which is a long time for a joke, of course, and it was all about penises, and you know, his team just about died. You know, in America you don't talk about penises, and anyway, he is a very direct kind of guy. So he wrote back to me about the translation environment. Some of you know, or many of you know, that I've been trying to get away from the term CAT, computer-aided translation tool. Well, actually, I didn't try to get away from it. I'm just what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to say what computer-aided translation is. That's many different kinds of technology, including project management, word counts, etc., that all aid the translator in the translation process. Those are all CAT tools. You know, not just the Traduces and déjà vus and crosses and memo queues, but many other smaller tools also. So those are all CAT tools. But the ones that really allow you to build this environment in which you translate the acrosses and the traduces and the, the déjà vus, those are translation environment tools or TENS. And so Eve wrote back to me on that. He says, I'm not convinced that the new naming achieves anything. Cat tool is just as wide and encompassing. And then he keeps on writing and writing with something, but then he says, anyway, your use of TENS does no longer bother me. Sail on. So let's sail on in our exploration of translation environments. So what my vision is, that we should not have to manage many different kinds of environments in which we work. My vision is that we manage one environment, one interface in which essentially all the information that we need is delivered to us, whether it's dictionary information, whether it's web-based information, whether it's obviously the information from our translation memories, from our term bases, whether it's information from machine translation, and where this information is not just being delivered to separately and kind of as standalone entities, but where these streams of information actually talk to each other, communicate with each other, in a technical kind of manner, and come out with things that where we actually improve each of these streams individually by having other streams of data improve their output essentially. And the other part of the translation environment, and that was something that many of you noted in that document, is that we need an environment that gives us essentially all the editing and authoring features that we are used from the typical authoring and editing tools. So that we have virtually all the authoring abilities that we can find in Microsoft Word, or all the proofreading abilities that we can find in Adobe Acrobat, or in Adobe Acrobat. And so those are two things that I think are really important as a translation environment. And I realize that some of you might not agree with that. That's my vision, though, and according to many of your comments, many of you share that vision. So here are some. I'm just giving you some ideas of what some of the tool vendors said. Star Transit, for instance, said really interestingly, they said we do have many features that are just not being well used because people just overlook them. So we get comments back from users, they say, where they complain that a certain feature is not present in a tool when in reality it is there, only that the user didn't know how to find it adequately. I think one way that many of the tools, including Star Transit, but also MemoQ or Déjà Vu or Trados, have been trying to address that is by going to a ribbon interface. The ribbon interface was not particularly popular when Microsoft Office came out with it in the first place, but I think it has sort of gained acceptance now. And what the ribbon interface allows tool developers to do is to expose features that were hitherto hidden in menus and just not accessed because users didn't know how to access them. Déjà Vu and MemoQ, and of course when I say Déjà Vu and MemoQ, I know that Déjà Vu's company is called Atril and MemoQ's company is called Kilgrey. I'm just using the tool names just for brevity's sake, if you will. What they have said is that what we really should have is a multi-vendor environments. And you see that I have the tool fluency, even though I didn't respond in parentheses, because what they, at least in the early versions of the tool, they did exactly that. So the idea is that if you have a really good, say, grammar checker, many of you might not like grammar checkers, but some of you do. If you have a really good grammar checker that has taken years to develop by a company that specializes in that, it doesn't make sense for me to develop it also. It makes much more sense for me to bring in that grammar checker into my tool. The same is true for anything really. I mean, no tool, for instance, I think that MemoQ mentioned that no tool has the ability to use voice recognition adequately. Well, excuse me, I didn't mean to say it like that. No tool has the internal ability to no tool offers voice recognition as a feature. You know, you have to have a third-party voice recognition tool to dictate text into tools. What Fluency did early on was that it essentially built an environment in which they brought many open source components that they mixed and matched in their environment, which you know, was really quite interesting, because what it allowed them to do was to, if a component didn't perform to the way in the way that it was needed, they could just pull it out and plug in another one that might have been more powerful. And both Deja Vu and MemoQ said that they think that, you know, a true translation environment in the sense of the vision that we are describing would would have to be a tool that follows kind of that path. Trados Studio, as you might well know, has done a different thing, and I think it's a tremendously interesting thing, and I'm really surprised that no other tool has followed suit. What Trados Studio has done is they opened an app store maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I was a little critical when they first opened it. I thought it was really not going to be very successful, and I sort of misunderstood it, I think, but I was wrong. It really became successful. So what Daniel Brockman from SDL likes to say is that Trados is not a translation environment tool. Trados is a translation environment platform, because it essentially gives, or a cat OS, he also said, which is kind of funny term, I think, interesting, because it allows many third-party developers to develop applications that then improve, you know, certain features within the tool without the main development team, or the original SDL Trados development team, to have to worry about it. Which I think is a really interesting concept, and it actually works very, very well, I think. And I hope that other developers take note of that and do something similar. And that, of course, you know, improves the translation environment. Still, I had a feeling after reading through all the answers that developers were giving us that we still need better ways to communicate what we actually need. Or maybe I'm just thick, maybe I'm just silly, maybe I don't get it. But I have a really strong vision. I hate to have to switch between 5 open programs, whether they're dictionaries or, you know, several websites and you know, and yet other programs, to get to the information that I need, which is then isolated. I want my information to communicate with each other. Of course, that's happening in many ways already, but I want more of that. You know, I think that some developers have sort of gotten it a little bit, and others might not have gotten it as much as at least I want. But anyway, so I would like to give you the opportunity to ask some questions if you would. So let's open it up for a couple of minutes and see whether you have any questions. So if you do have a question, you know, you can be unmuted by Lucy and Maya, or maybe they have some questions that they want to read to me.
Yeah, while we're waiting for someone to put their hand up or volunteer to speak, we do have one which you should be able to see in your questions pane, Jost. It's from Anne, and she's suggesting that what is really needed is a very clear user's guide, and then it would be up to us to refer to it.
Yeah, I you know, that's a really good point, and I think that that some tools are better than others. Let's put it like that, to prepare the documentation. I I happen to think that SDL Trados documentation, for instance, is not particularly good, and I'm sure that I'm going to have angry calls from them after this webinar. But I do think it could be much improved. Others are better, yet others are maybe not even as good as the one by SDL Trados. But I think just the user's guide is you're right. We need better user guides. We need better instructions, whether video based or in the form of help files or whatever to do what we need to do. But we also need maybe more intuitive tools. And I think that, like I said, the concept of MemoQ has done something really interesting, by the way, with their ribbon concept. What they have done, different than other tools, they have created process-based ribbons. So they are not organizing their ribbons according to sort of themes like you usually would see in Microsoft Office or other tools, but they have organize them according to the work step that you are in right now. So if you are in the process of translating a document, you are being shown the commands as in the form of little icons on the ribbon that you need for that. If you're in the process of exporting a document, you are shown the commands that are related to that. So that's an interesting step, I think, towards making features more accessible and visible.
Okay, we have two Luigis here. One of them has his hand up, so I'm now unmuting you, Luigi. Do you want to say your question?
Yes, it's me. Hi, Jost.
Hey, Luigi.
My question is about the side, in a sense, side features in TANS, and this side features relate I'm gonna say are concern quality and management, not project management, but management in general. So they could be of interest both for the translator and for the LSPs. So what I see, and I'd like to know whether you see you have my you can share my view, is that software developer in the software house, be it STL or Kilgrey or whatever, is really focusing on improving the quality management in projects, and in a broader sense, not just in the sense that we all have learned to handle in translation schools, for those who have attended translation school. The other, my other view is on management in a broader sense. I mean, I'm expecting to have in a near future a platform, not longer an environment translation environment tool, but really a platform who can be used by translators as a sort of personal TMS, or through which they could handle all the aspects connected with a project, and have a connector with the TMS of their customers, be it an end customer on an LSP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I mean, let me answer the second question first. I think you're right. I think that we will see platforms, and I think they're going to come out really soon. And I happen to talk to many different developers, and I have some idea of what some are thinking. So yes, we will see platforms. The question is, I think, whether the platforms will be successful in bringing in all the best of breed features into into the platform so that users can truly use the best of breed functionality and features. As to the first question, quality assurance, of course, is a big topic for many. Most tools have quality assurance features, but I think you're right that they're not, that they are lacking, and they're lacking, I think, in my opinion, and you might not agree with that, they are lacking in particular in the really important aspect of terminology verification. And the reason why they're lacking is because they have no morphology knowledge. Morphology knowledge to me is at the center and at the heart of how we can produce better quality. So morphology would be the database, the terminology database, the translation memory, all the different resources, being able to interpret the different forms of words and being able to actually transform them on the fly to give you correct endings or prefixes, suffixes, whatever, and that's not happening right now. So the terminology quality assurance that we have right now is extremely poor in really all the tools. Some are trying certain things with fuzzy matches. Some have some, so Star Transit, for instance, or Across, they do have some morphology for some languages, but only for a limited number of languages. So we need to do more there, and there are some ideas that people are having to change that. And I see that Daniel Brokman from SDL mentioned, and rightly so mentioned, that people actually have created their own manuals for SDL Trados and are offering it on Open Exchange on the app platform that I mentioned. So yeah, there is a user-driven documentation. However, not wanting to be too critical, but I think that it would be lovely if the company that develops the tool also provides the user documentation, and we don't have to wait for third parties to develop that. Anyway, so let's talk about this here, which is so relevant to me. So what do I mean machine translation as an organic resource? So what we have different assets that we deal with, right, or different resources. We have the translation memory, we have the term base, and if both of those are well curated, they're very predictable and they're trusted. They have good quality, right? Of course, that's provided that they're well curated, they're well maintained, and which you don't have to tell me that isn't always the case, but so there is that trusted component. And then we have machine translation, which, as we all know, is very unpredictable in quality, but it's a much larger linguistic resource than my translation memory or my term base could ever be. So what if we are able, and that's really the crux here, what if we're able to combine the unpredictability of the MT, but the large linguistic resource that it is, with a great predictability, but the much smaller linguistic resources of my term base and my translation memory. Which is very different to the concept of post-editing machine translation, where the machine translation essentially is in the driver's seat, and I, as the post-editor, just respond to whatever I'm presented with. If I'm able to use my resources that I build up over the years, or however I receive my translation memories that I trust, and my term bases that I generated, and focus on that, and use the machine translation just to complement that, and to make it essentially a better resource. There is so many possibilities, and what I'm so excited about, and I hope you hear some of my excitement, is that I think there is kind of a gold rush of creativity right now. So it's like there's so many ideas right now. Again, I'm talking to many different people. I'm talking to people from the machine translation community, from the translation technology for translators community, etc. And there are so many different ideas right now how to from which angle to approach this, and from which angle to get most of my resources with the help of machine translation. You know, it was interesting to see that most tool vendors had quite a bit to say about that, because the realization that this is needed is already there. You know, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We don't have to convince the tool makers that we need those features. They know, and they're working on something. So, for instance, Déjà Vu or Cafetran, which is the Polish tool that many of you might not have heard about, but a fantastic tool, by the way, or Star Transit, are really priding themselves, and rightly so, for having really good integrations of fixing translation memory matches, fuzzy matches, through MT. They are really three front runners there in that regard. Tortoise Studio, Daniel Brockman said, he says, you know, when he started to talk about it, he says, yes, this is key, realizing that this is really important to give us that possibility of getting more out of our resources with the help of machine translation. But he also pointed out, and I have to agree with that, you know, he says, that doesn't mean that post-editing of machine translation is going to go away. It's still going to stay. And of course it's going to stay for certain projects, but not for the large number of projects that presently are trying to being pushed through this you know, this channel of PMT. You know, so many of you will have looked at projects or have been offered projects that you know, you were asked to post edit where you knew it was a waste of time, essentially, and where you knew that it would have been so much more productive to have better technological solutions to work on those. There's other projects where it's a slam dunk, where you have to really correct so little of the machine translation matches when it's a machine translation engine that was well trained. It was a kind of text that was well suited for machine translation, where post editing does make sense. Whether you as a translator wants to do it or not, that's another question. But so post editing is not going to go away. But for the majority of text, I believe that, and it seems that most tool developers are agreeing with that, we need other solutions. MemoQ is looking at something really interesting, which they shared with us. They are, some of you might know that they are offering, right, for the last 6 months or so, they've been offering sharing of translation memories for free. So as a freelance translator or as a translator, you can choose to share your translation memory in real time with some colleagues for free if you allow MemoQ access to those translation memory for the purposes of natural language processing, not for, you know, them selling the data or whatever. And you know, many have done that, and so they are assembling a large pool of data, and they are thinking that maybe the improvement of translation memory matches couldn't maybe come through MT, but maybe also through, you know, the large resources that they're building up through those processes. And then, you know, I'm mentioning MemSource and XTM and Omega T and many others that are, you know, involved in ongoing developments and research in those fields. XTM, for instance, is involved in an EU-funded project called Falcon, where they look at improving ways to use machine translation in concert with other resources, etc., etc. So this is something that, you know, I'm not sure that we did find the next big thing, but if we found it, this is the next big thing, I think. This is the next big thing that's already happening. And, you know, Star Transit said exactly that. They said, what do you mean next big thing? This is already happening. We already have that in our tools. Yes, but it can be made better, and it can be, you know, pushed forward to ever better ways of extending the use of the data that we build up. So let's see. I see that, you know what? Let's skip the questions for now, and then maybe just have a little bit more time at the end. Otherwise, we're not going to get through. The next thing that we talked about was OS independence, operating system independence, and this is really interesting. You know, I didn't want to list that because I'm so sick of that, to be honest. I've led so many seminars and workshops over the years, and it's always coming up. And I know it's something that is hard felt by many, and but I think that we are, we are focusing on the wrong thing. And let me quote Yves again, Yves Champollion from WordFast. Now, WordFast happens to be a tool that is actually very cross-platform. So, it has three different, has WordFast Anywhere, WordFast Classic, and WordFast Pro. And WordFast Anywhere is web-based, so in that sense, it's cross-platform. And WordFast Classic is based in Word, so it can be used on Mac and Windows, and so and WordFast Pro is Java-based, so it can be done on anything. So they actually do have a sort of cross-platform tool. But let me read to you what he says about it. Again, he's pretty frank. He says, if a translator needs one particular tool, he should get the machine that runs the operating system that runs the tool. How much is a PC these days? Heck, a dentist student studies 10 years, needs an apartment for his practice and waiting room. Once that is done, gets a 10-year loan to buy the equipment, all that to be self-employed in a cottage industry. We only need a laptop, which everyone buys anyway. So he's saying, let's not talk about OS independence. It's, to be so focused on the operating system that you need. If you want a tool, it's the tool that's important. It's not the operating system that's important. It's not a computer that's important. If you find a tool that you really need and know, and where you know that it's going to improve your process or your output, then you should not be worrying about operating systems. So it really isn't that important. How what also was really helpful to me, that Yves and a couple of others pointed out, in my question to the developers, I said, well, maybe we have actually gotten beyond that question, because now there is web-based tools that are independent, and they pointed out that that's not really necessarily true. Of course, a web-based tool is not dependent on the operating system, but of course it is dependent on the browser. And anyone who has used web-based tools knows that it might work much better in Firefox than in Internet Explorer, or it might not work at all in one browser, etc. So it's, there is no true independence with web-based tool necessarily. Also, what's maybe more important, and a couple of companies pointed that out, is a device independence. So at this point, where we all have a computer or a laptop or whatever at home, but that we also have a tablet or a cell phone that is essentially a computer, we should be looking at a device independence so that we can use and continue our work, maybe not necessarily as a translator, but maybe as an editor, maybe as a project manager, on different devices. And I think that really is the more important question right now, which of course, there's some overlap between operating system independence and device independence, but I think that's the question that we need to ask right now. Let's forget about OS independence. Let's focus on device independence. Lastly, business models. I talked about the question that the way I phrased the question to the developers was, I wanted them to talk about disintermediation. What disintermediation is essentially is the business relationship between translator and end client, rather than having the intermediate language service provider in between. And it's been discussed for many years, and it's been discussed for many years as something that technology would have to deliver, because technology essentially would deliver the means by which some of the project management processes, some of the the distribution processes, etc., would be handled not by a person necessarily, but by technology. And I had some really interesting comments. I had sort of little not particularly nicely spirited. I in my question I put in and I said something like, maybe it's harder for companies like SDL Trotter Studio or Star Transit or LionBridge Translation Workspace to think about something like that, because they are also service providers. Interestingly, though, it was companies who are not service providers who said, forget about this intermediation. They didn't quite say it like that, but what they said is, companies like MemoQ or Deja Vu said, you know, disintermediation, if you work for a large company, not, of course, the, you know, smallest project in your one language, if you work for a large company, what typically happens, and we all know that's true, is that the freelance translator suddenly becomes an LSP because he has to contract with many other translators to get the many languages or the size of the project done. So maybe we shouldn't focus on disintermediation according to those guys. Instead, what for instance, MemoQ and Cafetron, and I'm not going to explain Cafetron in great detail, you can look at the document. Instead, what we need to have is ways to connect buyers with great expertise, and not just the pros kind of way where, you know, you say, you know, this is a translator from this into that, but where you can truly carve out expertises in a certain way and have your buyers or whoever wants to hire you because of that. SmartCat says that disintermediation will happen, and you know, of course it is happening in some way, but it will run to parallel to existing processes. Still, most tools do have places to connect right now. Maybe interesting for XCM, MemSource, MemoQ across SmartCat, WordFast. Maybe the WordFast and the Trotter Studio, the more interesting ones here. Trotter Studio does it through a will do it through a plugin that connects right into Prose and Elance and other you know, freelance marketplaces. And WordFast will come out with something called Translation Agency in a box. I'm not quite sure what the details of that are, but that's going to come in a short while. Instead, maybe when we look at business models, what we should be looking at, and that came out from many of those answers, and I tend to agree with that, are two things. One thing is that we need to look at new payment models. I didn't put this on the slide here, but I think it's obvious that most of us are looking for new payment models. We don't want to be married to the per word count anymore. We want to have a more professional approach to being paid and being able to charge. And we need to look at collaboration maybe more. You know, shared resources, translation memory, term-based, but also things like autocorrect rules. You know, that was something that Daniel Brockman mentioned, but that's something that has been happening for quite a while. It's just now happening more in a more organized manner, let's say. So what's user-driven development? We're interested in that, right? Because we're interested in having tools that work for us. So events like this obviously help user-driven development. User conferences help. MemoQ Fest is happening right now. WordFast Forward, the first WordFast user conference, is happening in a couple of weeks in Latvia. The SDL roadshows, the Across Advisory Council, those are all things that really help user-driven development. SDL Open Exchange is a fantastic way, I think, of user-driven development, because what that does is not only does it bring in new features that are needed by some users, but it also shows SDL what users truly want, because if one app has so many downloads, it will communicate something to SDL that that's a feature that is really wanted. Then you have something like Cafetron. Essentially it's a one-man shop, but because it's a small company that is where one guy does all the development, that guy is able to, you know, I'm writing a newsletter, as you know, and often I have ideas in my newsletter that I'm talking about a tool that implemented a new feature. What very often happens is that within 2 days that new feature will also be in Cafetron, because he is able to just do it. So that's a user-driven development of a different kind, somebody who is truly able to listen to its users, and because it's such a small operation, is able to implement it within hours. And of course the ultimate user-driven model is Omega T, which you know, is totally driven by its users because it's an open source tool. So those are things that we need to have more of, and possibly have you know, have different channels yet of how we can have user-driven development. So the next big thing, did we really find it? I'm not sure, but let's spend it. I know that we're at the end of the time, but maybe Lucy is going to give us a few more minutes, and let's see whether we have some questions. If you do have questions, let's make sure they're really short, so that as many people as
Yeah,
possible
don't
can
worry
say
about the
something.
time. They're not going to cut us off. We'll be okay.
Okay, good.
Right, so there was one question that came in, which I thought was quite interesting. Everyone's here, I'm sure, has heard of IntelliWeb Search. Clive's suggesting that that would be a good feature to be incorporated into many TNTs.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, then I'm a big fan of IntelliWeb Search. It's a fantastic tool, I think, and there really is nothing else like it out there. For instance, Daniel Brockman recently wrote to me from Trados that they have a tool that is sort of doing the similar thing. It's not quite doing a similar thing. IntelliWeb Search is really better than anything that I'm aware of out there. And what it is, for those who don't know, it's a tool that allows you quickly to access external resources, both on your hard drive and in web-based resources. But the next step of IntelliWeb Search, of course, is not to have to go to those places, but have the places come to you, and that's kind of the next step that I'm looking for.
Yeah, just to repeat the name, IntelliWeb Search is the name. I'm sure we can send it to you, Gladys, if you haven't managed to write it down. Here's another question. Speaking as a researcher, this is from John, I think that the proprietary CAT tools need to make it easier for computational linguistic researchers to evaluate their work in real-world projects, especially for smaller or uneconomic language pairs. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Thank you, John. By the way, John, I apologize. John was one of the people who who participated in the document, and he had quite a few comments on voice recognition, and they're really important, of course, and I didn't cut it out because I don't think they're important. I didn't include them here because we sort of talked about them last year, and I didn't see a need to really rehash that. But to come to your question here, I actually did mention that in the questionnaires, or in the email that I sent out to developers. I said, we need to have better ways of, for instance, measuring productivity with machine translation, and quite a few, and you will see that when you look at the document, quite a few did respond in a way that they are working on something where new productivity measurement processes will be in place soon. So that's something that I think people are aware of. So what John Moran, the person who asked the question, also did, for those who don't know, he took a version of Omega T and called it iOmega T, and actually did a fantastic job of logging everything that the translator does to be able to see what, for instance, voice recognition versus machine translation versus, quote unquote, normal translation, what the productivity gains are, etc., etc. So I think that's kind of what he's hinting at, and yes, I think that other tool vendors are working on something similar.
We have a question from Anne. Well, it's a comment, really, rather than a question. Do you think it really is possible to delegate quality management to machines? For example, she, and indeed I join her in this, find that a printout of a translated document is much easier to proofread as a final check before delivering the translation, rather than reading it on screen.
Oh, of course. I mean, absolutely. Of course, the machine is not able to really evaluate quality. If that's the case, then machine translation would be perfect, right? I mean, then we wouldn't need to have those discussions here. No, machines can't evaluate quality, but machines can help to evaluate quality. So if if, for instance, you have a glossary that the client wants you to use, and you are able to, and it's an extensive glossary, it's an extensive project, it's really hard for the human mind to find those few places where you didn't follow the glossary, and it's really easy, if it's well implemented, for a computer to find those places. That will be an example of computerized quality assurance, and again, it's, especially when it comes to terminology, it's not particularly well implemented by most tools, which is unfortunate. But so the answer is you're absolutely right. Computers can't evaluate quality, but they can help a great deal.
They can help with certain aspects of the quality, yeah.
Right.
Carolina is asking, in 2012, Kathleen Walsh asked you through a Q&A call that you had with Corinne Mackay about how we're doing regarding TM tools for the editing process. Where do you think we are now with this topic, and what can we expect in the near future?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I just had a very long talk with a professional editor about this very question, and I'm editing like most of you also are editors if you're translators, but I wouldn't call myself a professional editor and proofreader, because it's just one of the many things that I do. Whereas some are only focused on editing and proofreading, and of course they have much better ideas what these tools really need when it comes to editing processes, and only recently I understood what kind of things are missing in tools, and I think that we're not doing so well. I think that there is still a long ways to go. So what that person by the way, it was Itaris Wayman, who some of you might know. What she told me was that for her, as a professional editor and proofreader, the relationships are the most important component. So the relationships that she wants to maintain with the translators, with possibly the project manager, with other editors, etc. And what she is looking for are ways that the technology enables and supports those relationships. So for instance, any tool right now, virtually any tool, allows for comments, right? So you can edit something, or you can do something to a segment, and then you can add a comment to it saying, I did this because of blah blah blah. But in almost all cases, the comments are extremely hard to access. They are accessible only if you put your cursor on a little icon and then you have a little pop-up where the comment then appears. So essentially, they are, they're there, but they're not particularly, well placed into the workflow that would really improve the relationship between the different parties, because that they're often overlooked. Or what we came up with when I talked to Itaris is that, for instance, Adobe Acrobat, as cumbersome as that tool is in many ways, because we all hate PDFs, but Adobe Acrobat has a really cool way of summarizing comments, of printing out comments in all kinds of ways, of responding to comments, of notifying people when a comment is being responded to, etc., etc. So those are things I think that I would hope tool vendors would start to look at. And I apologize if I haven't really followed that. Obviously it was a long time ago that I said something about that, and nothing has happened much. So I apologize if I've kind of let the ball slip there, but I hope to be able to engage developers more in that discussion, and now that I've gotten more of a handle on it, and if you have suggestions on what can be done to really improve the editing environment, I would love to hear your suggestions. So please, send me emails or contact me otherwise.
Right, we have another couple of comments, questions. Shai, I think that's pronounced it correctly, says that the biggest gap is that the major translation platforms are developed mainly for the needs of the buyers. This is different from professional tools in other industries. Until this changes, most of the gaps will not close, because you can't serve two different business models equally. It's a topic that's worth discussion. I don't know whether you agree with that statement, Jost.
Well, I agree partly, but not completely. I know Shai well, so thank you for the comment. And I think so. I think if I would have read this maybe 5 years ago, I would have said, "Man, you're right. This is a real problem." I think it's still a problem to some degree, but I think it has really um, it I do see that there is a real move towards making the tools easier for us to use. Of course, it's that's a harsh overgeneralization, but if I look at the tool vendors that have responded, among them are fairly important tools as far as the number of users go, like SDL Trados or MemoQ or WordFast. I think that they have a much greater emphasis on what the translator needs than they they used to. And I think that's somewhat surprising, actually, because the new ways of improving translation productivity are much more difficult to measure. So it's much more difficult to measure, for instance, whether you benefited from a fuzzy match that was fixed by machine translation than just registering a fuzzy match and then putting a certain payment practice, a payment model into practice. So what I'm saying is the new kinds of productivity improvements are not immediately, I think, in the interest of large corporations because they're difficult to measure, and yet they're being implemented into tools for our benefit. So I think that's a really good sign, and I'm really pleased about that. And and so I don't share as I'm not as negative as you are on that front. Yet I of course do see that much needs to be done still.
And a last comment from Clive. Clive used to work in-house, and he comments that many freelancers hate post-editing machine translation because they're not directly benefiting from the corrections that they make. There's a lot of effort for very little reward. He mentions that he did used to do post-editing as an in-house translator, but he found that was rewarding because his input improved his later translation. So that doesn't apply when you're a freelancer and doing constantly different work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course that's a comment that's heard very often. But I can tell you that there is some real progress being made there. There is, for instance, a project that has actually just gone public a few months ago, where every correction you do to a machine translation suggestion, so every post-edit you perform on a machine translation suggestion is being taken into account right away and will be then used the next time a similar problem occurs. The tool that is doing that is called MateCat. It's an Italian tool, and the development on that feature was part of a European Union funded project also, and it's only available on a limited basis because it's not working with all kinds of machine translation engines, but there are some real efforts to change that particular problem. And I think there's quite a few other efforts that are similar to that are trying to get to it from a different kind of angle. There are some really exciting ideas out there. I mentioned the gold rush, and I think it is a gold rush right now. I could give you 5 or 6 examples right now of people who just have fantastic ideas how to utilize machine translation in a much more clever way than we've seen so far. And I think I'm extremely excited, and I think we are looking at sort of the same productivity jump. We're looking at the same kind of jump in productivity gain than we looked at when we first started to use translation memory.
Was that MateCat you mentioned just now, the tool?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Maycat. And they unfortunately did not respond. I don't understand why they didn't respond because they're very eager to
Mm,
talk about that tool usually. But they were contacted by me and they didn't respond.
okay.
But it's an interesting tool,
Okay.
Maycat.
Right. Well, if we didn't actually get to your question, we do have a record of it. So it will all be passed on to Jost for consideration in due course. The recording is being made and it will be processed by this time tomorrow, and you will be getting a link to it. So really, we're gonna wrap up now. I don't know if Jost, have you got any closing words or whether we are really at the end.
I'm at the
Okay,
end.
so well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Joost, obviously, for all the extremely hard work he's put into it. It's weeks, even months of work he's put into this. And all of you for coming and taking such an interest in the future of how the profession's going. Thank you, and I'm going to end the webinar now. Goodbye. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.